Well, like you can probably tell from the title, I got the GC8 Rally car completed. We did the rally. Everything actually went super smooth during the event. It was a really fun event, super fast, and the car just performed amazing. I did so many updates to the car compared to the last outing that we had a long time ago at STPR where we did the stage rally then. And honestly, all the updates just helped the car out so much. It survived quite a few different excursions out into the woods, which definitely weren't really planned on, and we had a few big hits as well that caused some problems, but nothing major with the car, only some flat tires that ended up showing up later. Unfortunately, due to the time constraints and having to go away for work, I didn't really have a chance to edit a whole bunch of videos and get them out during the build process, but the good news is I did film most of the stuff that I did on the car. So that stuff will be out relatively soon once I get a chance to edit it, as well as a whole bunch of stage videos, because we got a bunch of different angles. We got a whole bunch of different in-car stuff. I also was co-driving with Cameron Alfred. Some of you may know him and follow some of his YouTube stuff that he has. So he's a relatively popular YouTuber, and he was in the silly seat calling notes next to me. So that was a fun process. It started out a little rough, but once we worked through everything, I think we really started meshing decently well in the car and started to put down some pretty quick times compared to all the other cars in our class. Now, before I get into all the updates on the car, I just wanted to say, if you guys like this type of stuff and you want to see more, make sure you subscribe if you aren't already, and hit that like button every time you watch one of the videos. It really helps out the channel, and it would be awesome if we can try to help this thing grow a little bit more, but I need you guys' help to do it. And if you want to support the channel in a different way and get a cool t-shirt or hoodie out of it, I recently started selling some merch for the channel. So head down into the description below. Got a link to the store, got a whole bunch of neat stuff on there. Anyway, let's just get right into the updates on the car. All I literally did since the event was pull this thing out of the trailer and kind of clean up the shop a little bit because it was such a disaster. So anyway, we'll kind of start with the front of the car, go to the engine bay, and then kind of the important stuff is underneath with a lot of the things that I did up there. So we made this guy, and this is just a little like grill piece that's inset. It's mounted into the bumper with these little mounts all around. It's just something to help protect the radiator and the oil cooler from any big rocks getting kicked up. Should help limit any problems that you have there, or like we had a few times, if you take an excursion into the woods and you hit any sticks or trees or something like that, where it won't really cause much damage to the structure of the car, but could possibly puncture something like the soft radiator or oil cooler and cause massive problems because of that. This will help limit a lot of that. So that thing was super necessary, especially when we went off into the woods a couple times. Then continuing on, we obviously have this guy. This is different. I'll pop the hood in a second, and this is just a new intake box that I kind of came up with really quick, because this rally is known for having some insane water splashes and possibly having a lot of water come in. So this is kind of my workaround to try to avoid that. So this is the inlet to the air box. And then these guys that you see all over the hood are all the mounting points for the light bar that I have. Now, I don't have the light bar laying around right now, but these make a super easy way of mounting anything to the chassis. So they're actually holding a whole bunch of stuff on. They're floating riv nuts. I'll show you more in the future, but I use them all the time on the chassis. It's pretty much holding on the whole bumper, both bumpers actually, the fenders in a few spots. Most of the bodywork is actually held on by those, and they're super convenient because you just rivet them on from the back. And here they are, so you can kind of see what they look like from the back. So you just rivet these guys on. It's super easy to install, and like I said, you get a floating capture nut. They're available in a whole bunch of different sizes. They are a little pricey depending on where you buy them from, but they make putting on like race car type stuff super easy, and it just makes installing stuff that has to come on and off a huge breeze, which just eliminates so many problems. Then here's the other side of the intake box. It's nothing super fancy. I just made this little box out of aluminum and welded it to this little intake pipe. I still have the factory air box. This is more for simplicity to try to avoid getting any water into the intake, because it's pulling air from here, and obviously this has a whole bunch of water drains. So if water gets into the engine bay, because typically when you have a water splash and it comes up, it's going to just flood from the underside. So that's why this seals to the top of the hood, and it pulls all its air from here. So hopefully it should eliminate any water coming in, because the filter is all the way in here. So now it has to make it through so many areas to actually get any water in. But aside from that, we really didn't change too much on the engine bay, put a bigger alternator on. And this is just to help support the excess lights that we had. So we didn't have any issues with the alternator keeping up, which is great. We kind of reworked the brake system a little bit more, redid the lines because we were having some trouble getting all the air out of the system. But this seemed to make a huge difference. Going to these banjo fittings, so I just used half 20 banjo fittings to -3, and then just remade all the hard lines from there, and it seemed to eliminate a lot of the problems that I had with some air getting trapped into the system. Then you can kind of see we got a couple of DT connectors. Actually, these are DTP connectors for the heavy duty lights. So DTP, you can run 25 amps through them. So that's why we ended up going with the larger plugs on these. So it makes it super easy to throw the light bar on, because you just pull those 7 bolts out, throw the light bar on, run it through here, the cord, and then just cable tie it up, plug it in, and then you have your light bar on in about 5 minutes, which is super convenient, because then you don't have to worry about destroying it during the daylight or something like that. Now, moving into the interior, we really didn't have too much that changed with the car. I ran a lot of the same setup. One of the cool things that I did make with this was this co-driver footrest. Super convenient to have. I talked to Cam once we finished the rally, and he said it made a huge difference. Having something to brace your feet against that kind of allows you to just set the notes on your lap, and you don't have to worry about like physically holding them up the whole time. And I even gave him a horn button, if you can see it, if it adjusted. So you're able to like crank the horn really quick when you're flying past the spectators and not take your hands out of the notes. Then obviously we got the switch panel that I made. Came out pretty well. I integrated the vents for the heater into it as well. So that way I didn't have to make anything separate. I installed a new heater box. It's tucked up there. So it's a little tiny heater core with a fan combo. Much more compact than the factory unit. So that gave me so much more room around here to run a whole bunch of wires through and things like that. It is a little messy in here because I had some problems with the ECU. Literally like 2 days before we left, thought the ECU was bricked, so I ended up having to rip all this back out, and it turns out the ECU is fine, but we'll get into that later. And then with the switch panel, we've got horn on the far left, heater controls, and then fan controls, and then a couple of USB plugs. All of these come on with the first switch, so that's controlling everything. And then these two are the stage lights. They trigger relays with the fuse box. So we have a fuse box. So it's just a little Eden Busman fuse box, super convenient to wire up. A nice clean install that you don't really have to worry about causing any problems, because it's not integrated at all with any of the factory wiring. So it's all completely standalone. So if I have any issues with any of the stuff that I have wired up on my fuse box, I know it's with this, and I'm not tampering with any of the factory wiring. And I did rework this plate. I took the advice of quite a few of you guys, and I hated how I did it initially. So this is actually a inner tie rod boot and a CV boot. So someone said CV boot, someone else said steering rack boot. I ended up combining them because I needed it to be wider, but I also needed it to be really flexible at the top. So I ended up using both, cutting this one a little bit at the top to get it over the clevis, and then just hose clamping it on. As far as that, I think everything else kind of remained the same, except for the fact that we did get the fire suppression system mounted in the car. Obviously that is the new rule with ARA, so that had to go in here. I did switch everything out with the Stilo intercom system, so that was awesome to have because this car is kind of obnoxiously loud, and that intercom works really well. So we were always able to have good communications. And then coming back here, you could see that I made some different latches, or I'm using different latches to hold the trunk closed. These are nice, super easy to use, a little bit finicky to set up initially, but once you get them set up, they work really well. Did some different stuff to get the exhaust routed a little bit better than before, but we'll talk about that once we get it up in the air. I did all the organization of this area a long time ago, and it's a little bit messy right now, but I don't think I've ever shown it because I never published that video. But obviously you can see I got the spare tire mounted in here. There is room for 2 spares if I ever did a rally where I thought I needed it. Then we got little hooks welded to the floor everywhere where I think I need something. So we got our tool bag, which is usually really organized and all bundled up, but I had to open it to get something out of it once we got home. So really all I keep in there typically, unless I have a problem, is like a tie rod, some brake fluid stuff, brake line, alternator belt, and that's pretty much it. And then some random tools here and there, safety wire and duct tape. Because if you can't fix it with that, typically you're not going to be able to get back anyway. So that's why I have that in the car, because you can easily replace a tie rod type thing on the side of the road. But as soon as you get away from that and you got to do anything else, you're probably going to DNF and need someone to come tow the car back or bring the parts that you need and a jack and fix it on the side of the road. Then obviously we got our jack to pick up the car, safety triangles, 2 of those, tow rope, and then spill kit. Everything has its nice little home and it gets strapped into the car, and it's easy to find, easy to see. So that way when scrutineering looks through your car, they can easily identify it and you pass tech with flying colors, which this car did, which is always nice. And then I did change this because I got rid of like all the springs and tensioners and stuff when I gutted all that. So this is just a bolt that literally just slides over. Once you open it up, locks the trunk into place, which is super convenient. And it doesn't rattle out or anything like that. And it's not going to land on you because it physically cannot, which is awesome. I think that's pretty much it as far as interior and engine bay goes. So I'm going to get this thing up in the air and we'll look at all the stuff underneath. Well, right off the bat, the biggest things are going to be the new skid plates, front and rear, that I built for this car. Now, it was awesome because I was able to build them all and cut them on my plasma table. And I did get this one bent at a local shop down the road just because I didn't have anything that could bend something wide enough. So I ended up just putting a little brake in it right here and then a little bit more to give it a little kick up. Having something like this on a grassroots car is really nice because then it really helps eliminate any of the worries that you have of taking really hard hits. And it's all mounted to very secure locations. So like I said, you don't have to worry about it caving in or anything like that and crushing your oil pan or crushing something else, crushing your radiator. And then back here, obviously you can see it did come into use a fair bit. There were some rough stages out there and we ended up hitting some good stuff with this that helps protect probably like the gearbox and the exhaust and stuff like that. One thing about it though is it is kind of lower than it should really be, but I didn't really mind just because of the fact that it's the skid plate that's that low. Now back here, you can see that I have a massive skid plate, and this guy did take a fair bit of abuse as well, which is pretty typical for a skid plate. Like I said, that's what it's meant to do. One thing that's nice is I incorporated these guys into it. So these flaps and underbody protection protect so much vital stuff on the car and really make a big difference, because like all of my lateral links, all the suspension stuff, super relatively clean aside from going through water and things like that, but they really didn't get hit with rocks or braided or anything like that, because this stuff's going up and down with the suspension as it articulates and goes through its whole range of motion. So it ends up keeping everything super safe, and it's nice and beefy. This stuff's made to be replaced after at least every event, if not a couple times at an event, just in case you went on some really rough stuff. I do need to rework some of the things. I need to make some new mounting points in the chassis up here. As you can see, it scooped it down and it was kind of like holding in a lot of mud. So you really want to have this to where the very edge is getting pinched up by bolts. So that way you can't have this happen, because it will happen no matter what if you don't do it like that. Which, even though I have this bolt here and this bolt here, it wasn't really enough to keep it all the way sandwiched against the car once it started bottoming and just scooping like 5 pounds of mud per side right now. Definitely pretty gnarly, and I'll come back and add a couple more weld nuts to the chassis later on, or I could even just size these a little bit more appropriately and cut it like right here so it's just slightly in front of the bolts, and then it wouldn't be an issue. Now back here you can see that I made this rear diff brace. So these are a pretty common thing that you can buy, but I just built one. Typically you'd pick up these holes right here. You can see that one. You can't really see the other one because it's blocked by the bar. But this was to eliminate all the flex in the stock bushings of the rear diff. It really helped make everything feel much more stiff and like consistent and locked in back here compared to how it used to feel, because you'd like go to jack up the car and the diff would literally like go up almost an inch into the cradle before you'd finally start picking up the car. So that's all the play that it had in the stock bushings. And rather than replace the stock bushings, we just locked it to the car, which is then tied into the lateral links, so everything's rock solid. Then from here, these have weld nuts in them, and then you pick up and go to the bar that actually goes to the rear skid plate. And that's made to be replaceable, just in case you do take a huge hit to this. It should just deform this bar and everything else should be fine, to where you can just replace this bar. Really nothing else changed too much back here. I did have a huge amount of drama with the stock fuel tank. It ended up having a massive rust hole, had to pull it out literally 3 days before the event. Managed to find a new one, or not a new one, but a really nice one from a WRX, threw it in here, solved a whole bunch of problems, but that was a huge pain because obviously everything needs to come down, and I ended up having that tank out of the car about 3 or 4 times. I think that pretty much covers all of the updates that I did to the car. There was quite a bit. There's probably some stuff that I'm missing, and a lot of it seems probably pretty small because of the fact that I kind of just glossed over it, but a lot of it was kind of like major things to figure out exactly how you're gonna mount, figure out how you're gonna build it, design it, draw it up kind of a thing, and then cut it out, bend it all, weld it together. There was just so many projects like that that took so much time to get it all right. Just the wiring alone was a huge thing. Getting that fuse box in there was awesome. Really cleaned up the wiring, made it a lot more solid and reliable than what we had in the past. There's Deutsch connectors everywhere. Like there's a DTM 12-pin connector just going to the fuse box, so you can literally just unplug the fuse box in like 30 seconds if for whatever reason you wanted to pull it out and like add more connectors to it. You can just take it out of the car real quick, put it back in. Same thing with the switch panel, so if you want to add more switches or anything like that, it's all on the other side of that 12-pin connector, so you can just unplug it, pull off a couple of things for the battery isolator, and then remove it from the car. So it's super convenient to work on now. I was trying to incorporate as much of the stuff that I learned from working with Subaru Motorsports and VSC, and tried to make it a budget-friendly version on my own car with the time constraints that I had. I'm sure with a lot more time that I had and a lot more money, I could have built an amazing car out of this, but it's already so much better than it was. It handled great. The biggest thing about the car though, it definitely needs new dampers. These guys are totally shot, and it's just every corner that you're coming out of the car is just bouncing super bad. And it just made it really hard to feel comfortable going quick with them. And it was hard to go quick with them just because of how it was like literally bouncing you off the road. And another issue that I had was it kept popping out of second gear. So you do like low speed second gear corners or a handbrake turn, but it's not quite slow enough to where you want to shove it in first, and you put it in second and it pop out of gear as soon as it shifts. And I'm thinking that the problem was because of where I put the pivot. It's causing problems because the engine and gearbox are moving together because they're still mounted with group N mounts, which have a decent amount of flex in them, but yet the pivot on the shifter isn't moving with it like it would from the factory. So I'm thinking as it shifts, when you like get back on the throttle or hard braking, it's causing it to pop out of gear because it's pulling it out. So I'm hoping that's what it is. I'm going to eventually switch to some solid motor mounts and transmission mounts, or not necessarily solid, but very, very rigid with a little bit of compliance in them. And I'm hoping that that'll solve some of those issues that I have, and it should kind of like make everything feel a lot more like the rear end, where it just feels a lot more planted and it's not moving around as much. Anyway, I need to get back to work and organize the shop and then get some footage edited for you guys so you can follow along with the build series once I get them all out, and the onboard videos. We got a lot of really good footage from this rally, and Cameron is going to have some good stuff coming out relatively soon because he documented like everything for me, which was great. He does a good job actually like filming stuff. Unfortunately, when I show up at a rally, my focus is really on just making sure that the car runs, because that's my like biggest stressor, because I usually just finished it like 10 hours before the event. So I'm like trying to figure out everything on the car and I forget to film a whole bunch of stuff, but he did great on that. So he's gonna have a great video coming out soon, kind of showing when he showed up, helping me on the car for a little while before we even loaded up, to doing recce. It was both of our first time ever doing that, so that was a little rough getting started, but we ended up getting it down pretty well. And obviously all the stage videos, but we had a blast doing it and it was a lot of fun, and I can't wait to eventually get this thing back out on stage or hopefully I have a little bit more time to prepare it. But it's relatively well sorted, and there's nothing major that I really need to fix with the car right now, which is literally awesome. It's the first time that I've come back from a rally and the car wasn't completely like destroyed, or I had to rebuild a whole bunch of stuff on it. The biggest thing obviously is the dampers. I need something better before the next vent, but even those, I could run these guys until they literally pop. They're not going to perform well, but they still handle all the abuse. I haven't bent any of them, haven't caused any catastrophic failures, so why not run them till that? Anyway, I'll stop rambling. See you guys with the next video where hopefully we're flying down stage.